actually is. But nonetheless, it's true. She wanted to invest in me the ability to be the concert pianist she could not be. And so from very early age on, I was not forced, well, I was forced to practice piano. I didn't play baseball, didn't do anything. I played Chopin and Mozart from about the age of 2 until my mid-teens, where I switched to cello. I too, it seemed, weren't destined to become a concert pianist. But when I got to college time, I did major in music, and I did major in composition. And somehow, out of all of this background, I became a composer, and a very prolific composer. Got a couple of jobs, ended up at the University of California, and was doing quite well for myself, at least I thought so. But in the early 1980s, I suffered something called a composer's block. I had a commission for an opera, a rather large opera, a rather large commission. I also had a rather large family, 4 sons, who were young at the time, eating lots, and even though the salary was pretty good from the University of California, I found myself spending the commission before I had written the piece. And that must have put me in a strange frame of mind, because I suffered a composer's block. In about 1981, here with this large commission and a great performance on the East Coast looming, I could not figure for the life of me why a C sharp was any worse or better than a C natural, or a D any better than a C sharp, or why D sharp and C sharp could be used together, but so could 2 other notes of any distance. I mean, it was a complete, it was a mess. And I had to do something. I had programmed at the time a bit in the mid to late 70s, and I knew it was possible to do things with computers, although in those days they weren't quite the same beast that we have today. And when a friend suggested that I invent a composer in a computer, it sounded at least doable, and so I thought I'd give it a try. So in late 1980, early 1981, I set about the task of becoming a programmer and attempting to do something which I thought, as I said, was doable. That is, essentially recreate myself in a machine. I wanted a friend, a colleague, who, when I asked for a bit of David Cope, the next 10 measures, the next minute, the rest of the piece, in this case it was exactly that, or many pieces for that matter, that this friend of mine, this colleague, this program would in fact give me that music. And it wouldn't be random sounds. It wouldn't be just something that would be curious to me. This music must be in my style. It must sound like David Cope, but it must be new David Cope. It must have something to do with the piece that I'm writing at that particular time, but be different than what I've been writing. It just can't regurgitate it. It doesn't seem possibly like that big of a challenge, but it turned out to be that way. The first thing I did after I became a programmer again and became very serious at it, which by the way took a couple of years, the person, by the way, who commissioned this opera was extremely patient and had allowed me to continue, though I was not telling him what I was doing at the time, which was not composing at all. I worked on it, the program, and what I did was, I suppose, logical, although now in retrospect it seemed foolhardy, or it seems foolhardy. That is, I took the knowledge that I had as a theory teacher. By that point, I'd been teaching at the college level for about 20 years, teaching, Bach chorale writing, music theory, music composition to undergraduates and graduate students. It seemed to me quite natural that if I was going to get this computer to write in my style, I should, just essentially write a program that could do that. So I set about putting my rules into the computer, but I found very quickly that it's very, very difficult. Probably I was the last person in the world to be able to do that. When you start looking at your own music, your own work, your own art, even if you've been doing it for a number of years, prolifically as I had, you begin to realize it is very difficult to analyze it and break it into its component parts. Besides, I almost thought it was dangerous to do so, because it might in some way affect what I was going to do afterwards. So I was convinced over a period of months that I should not, in fact, write a program initially that would do Cope, but a program that would in fact do some other friends that I had in the biz, Bach, Chopin, and others. I was aware that individuals might think this would be heresy and that it might be unpopular. I didn't care for the following reason, that I didn't figure anybody was going to hear this music anyway. This was merely a step on the way to learning how to get cope into the machine. So I set about to do this, and what I essentially did was put down all those rules that I had learned over the years and that I'd taught so well over the years, I thought, into a computer program to write Bach chorales. And after another 2 years, we're not up in about 1984 to 1985, I had a program which produced Bach chorales, SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, which when translated into music notation, we had no MIDI in those days, so I had to do it by hand, still in the early to mid 80s, 1980s, did it by hand, and then I sang the results, or I had my family sing the results, and others at school, classes sing the results. Sounded like really sophomoric, bad Bach. It was a tragedy. I felt like at that point that I should let it all go, but for some reason I kept at it. And one of the things I discovered along this, at this particular juncture, was that, I asked myself, what if I had created a program that actually created really, really good Bach chorales? What in fact would I have? I would have a program that created really good Bach chorales, and I would not be that much closer to a program that created what I was after, really good cope. And so I said, I've got to take a different tack on this. So after, again, about 4 years of work, and I mean rather labor intensive, 12 hours in the lab a day, 7 days a week, many times, my wife tells me, and I believe her. Basically, I set about writing a completely different program. This one, in fact, had a whole different approach. This program, I felt, had a chance. This program had no rules in it, none whatsoever. I built it like a chameleon. This program was to change colors with whatever it received as data. The program was to look at a piece of Bach without knowing any Bach or any rules about Bach whatsoever, and then look at the music very carefully and say, what are the rules of this composition that's been fed to me? Actually, it doesn't even know it's a composition. These are just numerical relationships between notes in the piece, harmonically and melodically. What are those relationships, and how can I take those relationships and produce a replication of those relationships in a piece that's in the same style of, but not a replication exactly note per note of the music in my database? And I worked for a couple of 3 years on this with some good hopes, because I realized that if I could make this program work, that in fact I had a chance for some good cope, because there was nothing in the program that had J.S. Bach's name on it, or for that matter Mozart or anybody else's. The name that the end work got, or the style of that end work, was purely dependent on the data that was in the database. And this excited me, because I knew all along that if I could get it to work, I could, after all, put cope in there. And so I worked with this program until 1988. It produced, along the way, near the end particularly, some interesting examples of music in the styles of composers long dead. And I was interested in it, but not particularly. What I was interested in, again, was the ultimate solution, actually, solving the opera, which, by the way, had now gone 7 years unwritten, and still did not have note 1, because I was still suffering from a composer's block, and programming all those hours and listening to a rather bad output from the computer program was offering no help to me at all. In 1987-88, I visited a couple of conferences in my field, the International Conference for Computer Music, and in Illinois, as a matter of fact. And in the process of doing that, played a couple of outputs of my program, which had become fairly sophisticated at that particular point. I say that because it was so much better than it was, in 1983, that I felt good about it. Now, I played these almost as a joke at the very end of my presentation of this paper, believing that they were pretty bad, but nonetheless they showed that the program is coming along. This was a work in progress, I said. That is the program ultimately to get cope. I tell you that story only because when I was finished giving the presentation and then played 4 examples, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and Bartók were the examples, 10 measures only each of computer output, an audience of about the same size as you are here today, when I was finished, did not applaud me, did not ask a single question of me, And I was so disconcerted. I remember I left the hall before the rest of the papers were given and went looking for my car. And because I was so completely out of sorts, I couldn't find my car for the rest of the day in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. I was ready to call the police, where's my car, until I finally put myself back together again, feeling that my career had bottomed out, and this was the end. I later discovered that, in fact, apparently, according to people who were in the audience that day, that they were dumbfounded at the results that I had, or that the program had attained. It apparently was able to look at these examples and, without me or anyone else changing any aspect of the program, derive some rules and actually produce some music. I was excited about that, and believe it or not, in 1989, I set it about writing the opera that had by that point occupied my rear of my mind, and sometimes the fore of my mind, because I'd been called by the commissioner of that opera a number of times, asking where the opera is. Emmy, by that time it had received the name, Experiments in Musical Intelligence, wrote my opera for me in about an hour and a half. And I liked it. And it was performed to rave reviews in Richmond, Virginia. One of the reviews said, a great American composer. I still have that review, but I didn't tell anyone who had written the opera really at the point, and so it's a very strange experience to go back and look at that review now and see great American composer. Now, was it me or was it Emmy? It was, after all, my music that Emmy looked at to emulate my style. So I was very much involved. I wrote the program. It was my computer. I owned the computer. So there was a lot of me. So I'll accept this great American composer. Since that time, I've written a lot of music with Emmy, collaboratively, and Emmy's written a lot of my music. We will be performing in April of this year my Symphony 1383. I have 5,000 symphonies at present. I have not listened to most of them, nor in my lifetime do I have enough seconds left, even if I were to live to 120, to be able to hear them all. But the ones I've listened to, and the one we're going to do, 1383 this spring, I like very much. I don't know if it means I'm a great American composer because of it, but it's an interesting piece. What I'm going to do for the rest of my presentation today is play you a couple of examples of music written by this program. Now, the program is not with us on the stage today because it takes a little bit longer than just my speaking here to work for it. But it is, as I described to you, though not quite that simple. It has some more workings that I haven't described in detail. A pattern matcher for defining composers' signatures, for example, and more than a faint knowledge of music. But it does converse with me. It has I refrain from using the word elegant. It's an interesting kind of voice and communication ability that we worked out over the years. And so I feel very close to it. Again, when I compose, I actually compose myself at the computer keyboard, and then when I'm at a place where I'm just curious or a place where I've had a small composer's block, I just push the return button and I get as much as I want. I get, again, 10 measures, 20 measures, the rest of the piece. If I feel particularly prolific on any given day, I will ask for 300 pieces. Sometimes I have to wait till morning, but often it's worth the wait. So, Again, I remind you, this next piece, if you know the music of this particular composer, then you might recognize the style. For some of you, it might sound so obviously not of this composer that you'll think what I've done is pretty simplistic. And maybe if you are, some of you are good enough knowing the music of this composer to be able to tell that. However, there are some people who are experts at the music of this composer, that is musicologists, who are not able to tell the difference when this composer, this particular piece was mixed in with a whole assortment of works, many of which are not well known to that individual or to others. I'll leave the composer up to you and just play an example. I'm playing it on a different kind of Yamaha instrument than the one that you heard before. This is a full-fledged piano. And by the way, the recordings that I've made with my project and a lot of the work that I do is in conjunction with Yamaha pianos such as this one. I love these instruments, and so does Emmy. And this instrument is similar, except it has no strings. This is an instrument that has the same kind of touch, and you can still play it like a regular piano, but it doesn't have the usual strings. It has a set of speakers inside and synthesizers for creating a piano-like sound, and for that matter, other sounds like you heard before, orchestral sounds and so forth. Emmy is going to play that right now, I hope, if everything works according to plan. You may have recognized the general style of Chopin's Mazurkas, which these were based on. Over 50 were used in a database. And again, the program looked at all the 50, found the things that were in common, meter, keys, key types, and so forth, worked through them, and then was able to produce this as a result. Not all of the examples are quite as good as that, but most are. Some people would say were even better. And again, the take on whether this is great music or not is up in the air. This is challenging stuff after all. What I'm doing in the future now is Gustav Mahler was a great opera conductor in the late 19th, early 20th century. Great composer, wrote almost 10 symphonies, died during the composition of the 10th, but never an opera. So I have commissioned my program to write an opera. I'm doing the libretto, which is based on Mahler's wonderful, extraordinary life. And so it should be an interesting commission by me to the project. This one will take quite a while because of the libretto and other things that are involved. I have a couple books that are in the bookstore. One is called Computers and Musical Style, and the other is called Experiments in Musical Intelligence. The latter, this book, actually has a CD-ROM, and on it is the source code for a small ME kind of program. So should you be interested in this kind of research, carrying it further, you could boot that program up, take a look at it, look at the code, adapt it for your own purposes. There are 2 CDs out currently available. One is called Bach by Design, which was out in 1993 or 94, and one of the most current one is Classical Music Composed by Computer. And with that, I'll say I thank you very much.